Hello, hello. This is just a test. Can you hear me? Hello. It starts in 7 minutes. Great. Yeah, I'm just setting everything up. Testing, which all seems to work. So that's awesome. So behind the scenes, I'm doing this trick where I'm feeding my cat right before the stream in the hope of him not disturbing us. Let's see if that social experiment works. Ah, yes, the door noises. They can also be seen as cat barriers. Revealed to be a door, I like that one. A door that hired an actor to do all of his non-live videos. Yeah, that is true actually about the cats and dogs difference. There's only one master in this house, and he's eating now, so I can live stream. Hey, hello. Thank you for joining the live stream to celebrate 60,000 followers for the Money and Macro channel, with which I'm super happy and excited. And I saw already a couple of questions in the chat. If I was a door, well, I'm not a door. And also, why did I change the color scheme? Do you like the new color scheme? I think the thumbnail for this particular stream is the best example of what a lot of the upcoming thumbnails will look like. And the reason is really twofold. Well, there was this viewer I met in Groningen who told me, my man, I love your videos, but your thumbnails, they are mediocre at best. And your logo in the thumbnails is unreadable on a small scale. So and then, I looked at, after being slightly offended, I looked at the logo and I had to agree with him. So what I did is, with some of the first ad revenue, I hired some local students, art students, to redesign my logo and my color scheme. And the first design was actually using the same colors as I did, but yeah, with this new logo that you can actually read when it's small. But the thing is that I showed it to my patrons, and I really often got the remark that it looked too much like Economics Explained, because the old orange was really somewhat like the yellow from the Economics Explained, banners. So that's one reason. And the second reason is that all of a sudden this other channel, Visual Politic, I don't know if you know it, they updated their banners using exactly the same orange color with sort of similar text. So that sort of really pushed me over the line, that we needed a different shade of orange for Money and Macro to be unique. So that's why. Okay, let me just quickly read the chat. That has to be a Dutch person. Well, that is true. Okay, I'm glad some at least like the logo. I got quite a few comments that people didn't like it. But to be honest, for myself, the first time I saw it, I really didn't like it. But it has grown on me. So hopefully for all of you who are still in doubt, it will also grow on you. Yeah, who cares about EE? Well, I mean, I think it's still important that you come up with your own design, right? Like EE is the biggest economics channel, so I would like to have distinct thumbnails, right? I mean, yeah. Oh, and Abechang asks, why do you have to do this at like 9 a.m.? Well, it's 6 p.m. here in the Netherlands. And this is the moment where most subscribers are online, probably because it's just morning in the west side. I guess you're in California. No, is that the west side? Yeah, it is. Yeah, all right. So I think let me just scroll through some of the questions. And I'm just going to start at the top. Because someone asked me if I work at the University of Groningen, because I live in Groningen, and indeed I do. So I'm a lecturer, part-time lecturer at the moment at the University of Groningen, teaching courses in the Master of Economics and Business, but also Finance, Economics, on international banking and finance, global finance and growth, and international financial markets. So that's my doorbell. Someone wants to get in. Yeah, come on in. Come say hi. This is the macro cat. Has adopted the color scheme as well. But that's what I teach at the University of Groningen, and I still work for the University of Cape Town as well, but that will end in a month. And someone also asked me, could you recommend some literature to get started with monetary economics? I'm very interested in the topic, and I'll end my bachelor this year, but I haven't found any specialized master courses. And also someone asking if you do a bachelor in banking and finance, do I recommend economics, financial economics with that bachelor? Yes, for sure. I think that's definitely possible. It depends a little bit on the university you're at, of course, how compatible the classes are. But if it was at my university, you should totally be able to do that. I also started in finance and then moved to do a PhD in economics. That does work. It's a bit of extra work, but it does work. Yeah, and some cool literature to get started. Well, yes. Actually, sorry. I just found the perfect excuse to show some of the books that I used for the videos. So this is really an amazing book in my opinion. Money Changes Everything. It's really history. A lot of my videos, like the one on Athens and also credit money in Europe, and I'm now working on a history of central banking video, which is also for which I also read this book. But that being said, I think a lot of the more formal monetary economics textbooks are really boring and outdated. Just to throw in some controversial statement. Okay, let me just check for new questions. Oh, this is an interesting one. Why do you choose to spend your time making YouTube videos? What are you trying to do? Well, so the thing is, when I finished the PhD, which I really enjoyed. I always just wanted to know how the economy works, and I think a PhD is an amazing opportunity to do that because you have so much free time to interact with some of the most brilliant people, brilliant economists that are out there. You know, dive into literature and operate, I think, at the highest level of parts of economics. But then after that, the academic world is really competitive, and it's also pretty close-minded, so it's really focused on doing specific types of research. So for example, doing regressions or econometrics or that is amazing. I just got my first donation. I'm super happy with that. This is the kind of stuff that funds new logos and me eventually being able to hire an editor. So I will definitely answer that question. Thank you so much. But where was I? Oh yeah, why did I do sort of shift to YouTube? So I think the cool thing about YouTube is that it really enables you to do research that you would never be able to do in an academic journal. So for example, I did this really long video on comparing the American economic model versus the Dutch economic model. And this is really a case study. But the thing is, in academic economics, you can't do case studies. They just don't get published in the best journals. To me, that's just the most interesting. And I also want to do, so just to answer the question from Samuel, who kindly donated, because it ties into this, which markets do I find especially interesting? So the cool thing about YouTube is that I'll be able to make some videos about these markets and thus learn about these markets, because even if you do a PhD in economics, you only get to focus on this very specialized topic, in my case financial markets and monetary policy. But for example, I just sold my house, the one I'm in, the Money and Macro channel will actually move to Belgium. And everybody who knows the Netherlands and many other European Western countries knows that the housing market is just absolutely insane, right? It's crazy. And so what I will do is I'll make a video on that. And I get to truly do a deep dive into this housing market. But in academia, I would never be able to do that because I'm not specialized in housing economics, right? So it would take me a year to be able to operate at that level. Whereas now on YouTube, I can just do a research, sort of a more broader research. So housing is something I'm super interested in. Energy, not yet, but I would like to also do a deep dive on that at some point, just because I don't know too much about it yet. Financial markets are really where it's at for me, in the sense that that's my specialization, and that's banking, finance, it's the stuff I know most about. But I also really want to dive into manufacturing, labor markets, basically everything. Okay. Another question. What do I think about Richard Werner, especially what he says about how banks have to change? So the thing is, like, I don't know if everybody knows Richard Werner, but he is an economist who got famous by publishing this book called Princes of the Yen. So that's about Japan's central bankers. And so I definitely got a lot of comments on my Japan video. Hey, this looks a lot like what Richard Werner was saying. And do you know Richard Werner? And the thing is that my supervisor at when I did my PhD, and currently also my boss, Professor Dirk Bezemer, he actually worked for Richard Werner at a certain point. And so when I wanted to know how banks create money, because that's what got me into economics, I got sort of recommended to talk to Dirk Bezemer, and he gave me this book by Richard Werner, A New Paradigm in Macroeconomics is what it's called, and it also focuses on Japan for a lot. And so he has definitely inspired my thinking in the beginning, but where Richard Werner and I differ is that he looks at this issue like, oh, banks create money and central bankers have made a lot of mistakes in perhaps ruining the economy in Japan by letting the bubble get out of control. And then I say those same things, I think, but then I go like, oh, but I think the reason for that is that at the time you had this economic orthodoxy where markets are perfect, finance doesn't really matter, a bubble can never really happen because it's not rational to do it. So where I see sort of stupidity, if you can say that, he sees conspiracy. So that's where we differ. He's, I think, very much into conspiracy theories, and I'm more often into stupidity theories. All right, another donation. Thank you very much. Doing any call-ins? Take this as a thanks for dabbing on the dumpster. That is a lot of economics YouTube. What do you mean with call-ins? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I do have a Discord server for patrons and YouTube members where we might do some sort of, what's it? You also have that in Clubhouse, I think, like a voice channel at some point. Is that what you mean? But yeah, about dabbing on the dumpster fire, that's a lot of economics YouTube. Yeah, that's weird, huh? I mean, I saw this video, it just rubbed me the wrong way, and frankly, I saw some other videos that got me the same reaction from me. I think a lot of economists that I talk to don't even watch economics videos on YouTube because the quality is frankly mediocre at best, with a few exceptions, of course. But yeah, so I just made that video as out of the passion of trying to set the record straight, and it did really well. And then I also discovered, like, hey, people find this actually really entertaining, and I found it entertaining to do as well. And at the same time, I think it's a very useful service to the community to check, keeping them honest in a way. So I will definitely make more of those. Although I want to do non-EE videos first because, yeah, I mean, I don't want to be the guy who's only going after one channel. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. So it will be a series on this channel. It won't be the main thing. I want to do my own research, but it will be something that's there to stay. Okay, Joshua, another donation. Thank you so much. Do you think Dirk Bezemer's debt model is still valid for understanding economies today? If so, what aspects should we be paying attention to? So what he's referring to here is Dirk Bezemer has this theory about debt and money creation, where he's saying this used to be pretty good. I think this is reflected in my my credit money video on Europe. Like, hey, this actually helps people to grow their business and to make stuff, basically, right? But then his theory is like, oh, but starting in the 80s and then going to the 90s and now, there has been this process called financialization, where banks and have become it's become much more normal that they now allocate credit to speculative assets or financial assets like mortgages, and it used to be stocks a lot, right? And then, maybe not coincidentally, from that moment on, we've seen all of these massive financial bubbles and much more instability than we had before that. So I think that model is definitely still valid, and I'm teaching that model with him in our courses. Greetings from Chile, Mateas. Thank you. I've actually been to Chile. I loved that country. It's so beautiful, Patagonia in particular. So I'm very happy to have some viewers from Chile, and I will turn my attention to Chile at some point, as well as some other South American economies. Okay, here's another question I get a lot. What do you think of MMT? Sorry if this was already talked about. No, it wasn't talked about yet. I get this question a lot. So MMT is some modern monetary theory. And I think the main point of modern monetary theory is the government can create money, and so it can never run out of money. So that is often interpreted as by people saying, well, but then you're saying the government can borrow infinitely and, whatever, there's no limit. That's not true, as I understand it. This is something that I hear only from people who talk about MMT, but never from people who are MMT researchers themselves. They say, that's how I interpreted it. They say, well, the limit is inflation. So if the government prints a lot, you will get inflation at some point. And so that is what limits government spending. And I think they often attach it to political means or motivations, which is saying, we can actually, especially in Western economists and especially in America, we can actually pay for a lot of the stuff that we're not paying for now. And so because we're so far away from inflation taking hold, I think that's sort of the nuanced position that they take. But the theory itself is much more extensive than what I just said. And I actually don't know too much about it yet. So I think I'll have to do a video on it at some point. Yeah. Wow. Another donation. Thank you so much, Mingjian Li, if hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Let me check if there are some other questions. Do you think credit allocation should be focused more on real economic growth instead of speculative assets? And some greetings from Peru after that. Greetings back from the Netherlands. Yes, I think that credit should be focused more on economic growth rather than speculation. I think that, speculation has really gotten a bit out of control. I know I haven't focused too much on it on the channel as of so far, because I think there was just so much misinformation about central banking and how that all works out there, that I wanted to focus on that first. But that actually landed me in some hot water sometimes in the comment section, because people were saying, so, you're promoting quantitative easing or you're defending banks. And I can understand why they would say that, but I'm not that positive about all of that. I do think that the economy has become too financialized. Just for a personal example, like me moving from the Netherlands to Belgium, and the Netherlands housing market is just absolutely insane. The Belgian one, they will tell you it's insane, but it's from a Dutch perspective or from a UK or Scandinavian or perhaps even American perspective, is not that crazy. So if you move from a country where the housing market is insane to one where it's less insane, you make some money, right? Even though I put it all in a new house, so I don't. But the profit on that was more than what I earned from YouTube in 1.5 years. And I think that's wrong, right? That can't be good for the economy, in the sense that the one thing was me, just owning a house, sitting on my ass doing nothing, and the other thing was working my ass off. And the one thing earns more than, and so I think that's a prime example of financialization, and that is a consequence likely for a large part of credit going way too much to the financial sector rather than and to asset prices and houses and all of that. Okay, let me check. Some greetings again from Brazil, Peru. Thank you. Okay, here's a question from Mitso. Dollar-denominated bonds are more attractive for foreign investors because they... Oh, you're answering someone, I guess. Because they don't face exchange rate risk. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, especially if you're in a country with a small currency of its own, right? And you're doing a lot of international trade. Yeah. Oh, okay. Maria has a very interesting question. What are your thoughts on the broader fiat currency devaluation due to printing of money globally and sovereign debt increases? So, I mean, this is a very hot topic on YouTube, right? And especially now, I totally understand why, because we have much more inflation than we used to. And in emerging economies also there's a lot of inflation. But for a European and I think also for Americans or people from the USA, inflation used to be extremely low. And Japan is even more extreme, right? Where you could say that they really did a lot of money printing, even though, you know, they didn't actually do that. They had a lot of QE and a lot of government debt increase, which is similar in effect. But... and there they had deflation, right? So I'm wondering, like, is that link really so strong? And it might differ for economies, but I think the narrative, the simple narrative of money printing, inflation, is too simple. And also, like, I do know that the stance from many economists is that a little bit of inflation is good. They want that. They want 2% inflation. But I have never found the arguments for that to be too convincing myself. But I will do a video on inflation with the channel Unlearning Economics, which is another academic from the UK. A bit more political, I think, than I am typically. But he's definitely someone who knows his stuff. And we'll do a video on inflation and where it comes from in the future. Because that's a very difficult topic. Okay, let me check. What do you think of economies of countries like Sri Lanka that are heavily indebted to China? Very interesting. So I haven't done... I think this is very important for me to tell you, is that whenever I do a video on a country, it takes me, a full week of research, sometimes more. And I learn a lot on that specific country. And Sri Lanka is one I haven't done research on, but I do understand that they have relied quite a bit on Chinese funding over time, or the last couple of years. And I do think that and that goes for the broader Belt and Road Initiative, where a lot of countries in Asia have been funded by Chinese money. But I think what I've seen, they're going about it the wrong way, I think, because so what I read ends up happening a lot of times is that they borrow money from China to develop, which is really good, I guess, right? Like in principle. But then who comes in? A Chinese construction firm to make it all. So that's already like a big loss for the economy, which is important if you want to pay back your debt, right? Like as a country, there's not necessarily something wrong with borrowing from abroad, but you prudently should do that productively so that you can repay those loans later, right? And that doesn't seem to be happening. And it also seems that there is some sort of geopolitical, strategic objectives there of where if they won't be able to repay the loan, they might lose this port or some other strategic object. So the answer to that question is, like, in principle, I think it's totally fine and normal that developing countries start borrowing more from sort of upcoming global economies. But I'm not sure how prudent they are going about making sure that that credit ends up productively. Okay. Ooh, someone from Zimbabwe. That's great. So I met a lot of Zimbabweans when I was in South Africa, and I'm always impressed by how smart Zimbabweans are. I think that's absolutely amazing. Just let me scroll up a little bit. Zimbabwe. What can be done to let banks increase productive credit creation when it is low? For example, in Japan, 1991, and USA, 2008. So there, when you say when it's low, I'm assuming that you mean when credit creation is low, and perhaps also the economy. So there, this is why I think central banks at that time drastically lowered interest rates and pumped liquidity into the system to take some of that risk away of starting to lend again. So, but then in highly financialized economies, it's quite tricky to get them to lend productively again. Like how do you know that they won't start lending to re-inflate that same asset bubble, which is very tricky. But actually, I just came across this press release by the European Central Bank, where they have now, with the Corona crisis, started this project where they had this, they would lend to banks, and in the conditions it would be, but only if you re-lend that money to firms and households. Well, the household thing I think is pretty stupid because that mostly goes into mortgages, but them sort of specifying the firms is an improvement, I guess, and it shows you that you can actually steer that a little bit. Although, I mean, you should be careful, I think, with how much you can steer, because market participants are very clever and often get, find workarounds around your clever policy design. An interesting question from Noah about financialization, but also how do you get into agent-based modeling? So I really like this question because this is what my thesis was about. Do I have it? I don't know if you can actually read this, but this is agent-based simulations of monetary policy and financial markets. That's my thesis. And agent-based simulations are a way of modeling the economy that is very much like a computer game. So there's actually this great channel which I really love. It's called Primer. I don't know if you've seen it, but they do simulations and with these weird blue blob people to visualize it. And that's actually agent-based modeling. So it means that you actually have your little computer people do stuff, like traders in my case. And how do you get into that? Well, you have to learn how to program first. So the first 2 years of my PhD were spent learning programming in Python. But there's also this amazing software called NetLogo, which you can use for free. And you can start playing around with some super simple agent-based models. So that's, I think, the best way to get into that. Okay, let me just scroll down. There's I'm so sorry if I'm missing some of the questions because there's just so much to read for me. Another donation from Joshua, who's also a patron, by the way. I'm very glad that you could join the stream. Asking about cryptocurrencies. Yeah, I think there's also some other questions about cryptocurrencies. This is a subject that has my interest as well. I want to do a couple of videos about it in the future from an economist perspective, because I think a lot of the crypto YouTube space focuses on either how the technology works or how much money you can make. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, can it be new money, right? I think that's the most interesting bit. And Joshua asks if they have a capped supply, so the supply is stable. And so the idea is that they are deflationary because there's such a limited supply. And so if you have an economy that is expanding, but you have a currency that is stable, then you likely will get deflation in the sense that this currency becomes more valuable while your economy expands and people can't get their hands on it to trade. So I think that idea is not underrated at all, but we haven't fully seen that yet because these cryptocurrencies aren't typically used as money on a large scale yet. That's why sometimes now they are inflationary in the sense that some of the cryptocurrencies do go down. But yeah, I don't think they're very promising as money. Maybe if just to tie into Lucas's question about DeFi or decentralized finance, which is the next big thing, I think, in crypto, where how would you compare the range of tools available in decentralized finance to centralized ones? Yeah, I can't yet fully answer that question because I still have to get into DeFi. I want to do a couple of live interviews with some players in that scene, actually, if this stream is a success, which I think it already is for me. But so I can't comment on it too much yet, but I think that the whole idea is super interesting. But from my agent-based modeling experience, I do question how well people are, because often the idea is in decentralized finance, we just program rules for the financial institutions, and then based on that, people trade through that rather than through a bank, for example. But I like that idea, and I think where it's coming from a programmer mindset. You think, well, these people are super annoying, they're unpredictable, you can't trust them, which you can't always, of course. But what I've noticed when making agent-based models or trying to make my virtual economies is that often the system would do something that I hadn't expected beforehand. And so I'm wondering if you code up a decentralized finance system with fixed rules or machine learning or, I don't know, maybe anything like that, not human, perhaps it doesn't have the flexibility to handle a situation which a programmer hadn't expected beforehand, which will happen, I think, in a complex system. So, but more on that later. Okay, a question from Xavier. Fossil fuel prices are soaring now that the economy recovers from COVID. When do you expect prices to go down, and how disruptive is this price boom? Ooh, that's a really good question. Oh, I see there are some other questions as well, which I will get to. Yeah, crazy how these have soared. So this also ties into this earlier question where the energy market is something I'm not super experienced in yet, but I do want to make a video about it at some point. But I do know that they have this very strong dynamic where supply, it takes a very long time to adjust to demand. And I know that not even a year ago, there was just an oversupply of both oil and gas, right? And sort of the idea was that this would be the new norm. But the thing is, because it takes so long to activate a lot of these shale oil fields and especially if you want to explore new fields, you get these massive swings. In economics, I think the model that best describes this is called the hog cycle model, because this also happens with hogs, which is another word for pigs. But I don't know when it will change. Also because it depends a lot on politics, right? Like just yesterday, apparently Russia announced that they would increase supply. So I think that's the trouble with people making predictions in economics. This is based on humans doing stuff. So I can tell you, like, oh, based on the supply and demand, which I have done research about, it should go down. But then maybe Putin has a geopolitical goal and comes in, and my prediction is gone. Okay, here's just another question from someone from Norway. Kvinde? Is that? No. I'm mispronouncing it. Kivikende? Thank you so much for donating. But your question is, should Norway issue government debt or use the oil fund? Ooh, that's an interesting question. I don't know how the government debt position is at the moment. I know that that Norway had this oil fund to prevent Dutch disease, which we had, especially here in the north which came from the north of the Netherlands in a way because we found a lot of gas here. And so what happened is that this gas supply was just so massive that the Netherlands started exporting so much gas and spending that money on nice things for people, I guess, in the economy, that the currency just got worth a lot more, and that was bad for our exchange rate, and that supposedly destroyed a lot of the export industry or like productive industry in the Netherlands. so that's why this oil fund exists. But then I think you do run into a problem at some point, like should it still exist, or how big should it get? But my knowledge on Norway is now not good enough to properly answer it. I'm sorry, but I will make a Norway video as well at some point. There's also a question from Maarten, which is also on top of my mind. Should we fear stagflation? What's your perspective? How will this be impacted by rising energy prices? So stagflation is the idea that you have stagnation and inflation. And why is this weird? Because the main theory of inflation, the one that most economists use, is based on demand. So if overall demand in an economy climbs by a lot, then you might expect an overall increase of prices. This is what they often use in terminology, is they're saying the economy is overheating. And I think this... so that's why this is very controversial in the sense that inflation, if you believe that about inflation, then you think, oh, you have inflation and an economy that's overheating. So you can't have stagnation and inflation. But as we are experiencing now, a lot of inflation also comes from the supply side, in the sense that your resources might become more scarce, or in many of our cases, supply chains are disrupted, and so we get inflation from that side. And if that happens, I think we can technically definitely get stagflation, because we could very well see stagnation. I mean, our economy is still very, like debts are really high, so it's quite vulnerable, I would say. And we could get a lot of supply-driven inflation right now. So I think we could technically get stagflation, but it would be different from the 70s, because in that time period, labor unions were still much stronger than they are today. And so they also had an impact on inflation, in the sense that the economy was down, but they were so strong that they could still negotiate higher wages. And so the dynamic will probably be different. And then there's a question from Crash Tag. Will you do a China video? Yes, I want to do a couple of videos like my Japan video, which is all about the rise, or like the Japan one was about the fall of a major economy. But I want to do like a rise and fall series that's a bit more in depth. And in that series, the Eurozone will be the first one, because I can use it for one of my courses in November. And then after that, I want to do a China one. But the China economy is just so insanely complicated that I will have to do a lot of research on that to make a proper contribution. Okay, Nicholas, thank you also so much for your question and donation. What are your views on the prospect of central bank issued digital currencies? Thank you. Well, I also want to do a video about that one. It's been on my list for a long time, but I just don't have the time to do everything at once. But what do I think about them? I think it's high time that they come, because it's just, we use a digital currency now. I think the monopoly that private banks have on issuing digital currency is a bit weird. Like, I mean, why do we give this monopoly to these private enterprises? So I think it's good that they would come with those, but I guess there are very legitimate privacy concerns. Like, do we want the government to have all of our transactions? So I hope they come up with a way where it's sort of voluntary, where there are central bank digital currencies, and then there are also private currencies circulating side by side. And then another argument, central bankers, I once asked this same question to the Dutch central bank governor a couple of years ago, and then he said, like, I'm not going to do it because there could be a bank run. But I think that's a pretty dumb argument, in the sense that, like, banks should be able to either provide a better service on your money, right? Like more convenient, better application, or a higher interest rate. And otherwise, they're not doing a very good job at being a bank, right? Okay. Whew, some more questions. Is the Phillips curve dead? The idea about the Phillips curve, it ties into what I mentioned earlier about inflation, where you have like inflation from the demand side, and that can come, I think, from two two sources. One is money printing, often not in the form of money printing, but I do think that if you would create a lot of money in an economy that's not ready for it, that you could get, and that translates then into demand, and that translates then into inflation. But the other one, which was more popular in the last couple of decades among economists, is the Phillips curve, which is more about the economy overheating first, and not money creation first, but like the economy overheating, and then laborers or workers collectively asking for higher wages. And so there, if that is true, if that is how the economy works, there should be this relationship between wages on the one hand and inflation, or like unemployment on the one hand and wage and inflation on the other one. And that one has been very difficult to find in the data these last couple of years. But I don't think it's dead in the sense that I think it's just one of the channels of inflation. So, if that channel is very weak at this point, doesn't mean that it has to be very weak in the future. But I would never use only the Phillips curve to understand inflation. Okay, so there's also a question from Matthias about my opinion about the Argentina peso, which I know is... So, as I understand it, Argentina is a highly dollarized economy. So a lot of people not only use the peso, but they also use the American, the US dollar. And I think that's why they get into these debt troubles very often, because they borrow not in their own currency. But as some of you earlier already mentioned, it makes sense to do that because it's much less risky to borrow in dollars from the perspective of many Argentinians. So I think it's a weak currency, and I think they really need a good plan to get it back on its feet. Because if you are a dollarized economy, you could. I think that is a viable strategy sometimes. Like if you really messed up your currency, you could choose to adopt dollars, but you typically want to get rid of that right away because you don't issue dollars. So if your economy gets into trouble, no one will come to help you typically, right? So I think the peso should be improved, if you could say that. But that's very difficult, and I'm not sure how capable the Argentinian government is of actually doing that. But Argentina is also a candidate for my Rise and Fall series of videos, because I've heard credible arguments for people saying that the standard story, that it used to be this paradise economy rivaling the US and then sort of falling because they implemented socialism or something. I think that I've heard good arguments that story is not the complete story. So I think I should have a deep dive on that as well at some point. Ooh, okay, let me just have a look at some more question. Yeah, as more countries are increasing their interest rate amidst the pandemic, is the economy really recovering? That's a good question. I think the economy is really recovering in quite a few countries, but I'm not sure if that is causing the inflation at the moment. So I do think there's a bit of a risk, and this is also a debate that economists are having right now. And it really ties into what I said about, is inflation coming from the supply side or from the demand side? If it's coming from the demand side, it makes sense to raise interest rates. If it's coming from the supply side, it doesn't necessarily make sense to raise interest rates. But a lot of countries are doing that, like, for example, Russia, I think Brazil as well, if I'm just top of my head. And I'm not sure if that's smart at the moment. But one counter argument to my own argument there is that for these countries, they also have to really take into account that they get enough money flowing in. So raising your interest rate can sometimes also be for them a way of attracting foreign capital. But they always have this dilemma between raising interest rate to get more foreign money, but at the risk of sort of destroying your own economy. So there's this inherent dilemma there, I think. I hope that does answer the question. Let me just scroll through. Let me see. What if every country had UBI? What if the entire world? Yeah, that's also a very interesting question. So UBI is another subject that I should do more research on. But that being said, it's very difficult to do more research on that because UBI has never really been tried on a large enough scale, in my opinion. I know they had a lot of trials, but they would do it in a village or something, and then they would look at how does it impact the life of these individuals. And they typically found that they would be less stressed, and they typically also found that they would not necessarily stop looking for work. So, okay, that's great, but I'm more interested in the macroeconomic impact of UBI, or universal basic income, which is, just for everyone who doesn't know about UBI, is giving everyone sort of an income, non-conditional on them working or doing anything back for your state. And there it does remind me of one thing that I discovered when I made these agent-based macroeconomic models. So in these models, we did have a business cycle of sorts. So the economy would sometimes collapse and sometimes it would go back up. But the weird thing is then I would dive into that model with all my little simulated people. And I would wonder, why does it stop? Like, why does it go back up? Not at, rock bottom, but at some point. And what I found there is that Social Security sort of put a floor under the economy. And I suspect that UBI might do that as well. But that being said, so that could be very useful. Then again, I do understand the idea or the argument that there are some people who stop working if you only give them money. I don't think it's like a lot of people don't work like that, but some do. So because we have never tried this, it's very difficult to predict if it will work. But it's a very interesting idea that I want to explore further as well at some point. Okay, Tom, how can North Korea grow its economy? Keeping Kim. We have a Kim fan in the house. North Korea is also, and that's definitely an economy I don't know that much about because it's just so, they don't have any credible data, right? How can they grow its economy? It is possible, I think. Just like any economy can grow. But for them, I think it would be smart to not antagonize sort of their neighbors as much, or maybe even the US as much, and try to, because once the sanctions are lifted, it could export more, right? That's what I would do if I were them, because it seems a bit useless. And that, like, even if you want to go against the USA, which is fine, they can better do that after they've grown their economy, like China did, right? But anyway, I'm not a political scientist. Okay, Darkwin the Elder, thank you for your donation. I like the sobriety of your content, just like my classes, but more entertaining. Thank you. That is definitely the goal. I've also tried to become a bit more entertaining over the course of time, as I learned to have more fun, I hope, in front of the camera. Greetings from a business student of the University of Chile. Thank you so much. Lots of Chileans, that's awesome to see. PJ has a question. If the inflation is supply side, then shouldn't central bankers reduce the money supply? No, because that's also typically something you would do if the inflation is from the demand side. Because then you get less activity and the economy cools down. But if it's from the supply side, for example, now, like a lot of our inflation is imported from China because there are major supply disruptions in China. And so a lot of the stuff that we import gets more expensive here. Well, that's inflation, right? And that's actually bad for the economy. So if you then cool down the economy as well, does that change the supply disruptions in China? I don't think so, right? So, no, I don't think that will help. Let me just check. So Mr. Mineheads is, I think, repeating often this question. Do you have any thoughts on the Cambridge Capital controversy? And there I have to admit that I don't remember what it is, the Cambridge Capital controversy. I know about it. I've heard about it at some conferences, and I think it's about some Maybe some people can help me out in the chat, but I think it was about sort of this battle between what is now mainstream economists and some economists in Cambridge, and the Cambridge people lost, but I can't remember why. So if you could tell me again what it was, then I might have an answer for you. Mitso, as promised in your community post, I promised something, and I should keep that promised. What are your thoughts on weighted monetary aggregates? Oh yes, I remember your comment. Like division money aggregates. Do they make the equation of exchange relevant for practice again? Ooh, so now you are throwing in some terms into the mix that I didn't read in what I found on weighted monetary aggregates. But what I got from that, let me just quickly get a sip of tea. What I got from that post about, I think you posted a link to it. Weighted monetary aggregates. So, okay, we're talking about monetary aggregates. So that is M0, M1, M2, M3. So it means monetary aggregates, so money supply, and there are different forms of money, like cash. I think that I explained this in my response to hyperinflation video. So like cash is in M1, M0, and then bank deposits are in M1, and more broadly, deposits are in M2. And so if you... the problem is that, so these monetary aggregates have become way less popular over time. Like economists typically don't use them. But on YouTube, in the YouTube world, they're super big. Everybody uses them. But the reason that economists have stopped using them is because money and what people use money for has become much more complicated over time. There are all sorts of different forms of money, and people can shift between these forms of money with relative ease and for reasons of not purchasing goods in the real economy. So this is what Economics Explained ran into by stating, oh, M1 has gone up insanely. But then, diving into the footnotes, I found, well, there was a regulatory change, and then people changed from M2 type money to M1 type money for not for buying goods, but just because the one thing became more attractive from a regulatory perspective. And the same issue happens with all sorts of money. Also, especially in M3, where there are more complicated forms of money included, like investment, specific savings accounts in banks, but then you also have in what they call the shadow banking system, meaning financial institutions that are outside of the banking system, but they offer products that's very much like money. And then so the same thing where M2 money shifted to M1 for no reason, no inflationary reason, also happens between M3 and sort of M4, which doesn't exist. But, you catch my drift. So the idea is that these monetary aggregates are just, they don't say that much because money is so fluid, and something changing from one money type to another doesn't necessarily mean that will be used to buy goods and services. And I think your monetary aggregates weighted was about trying to solve that, I guess, by weighting the different types. But that's how I interpreted it. I'll look if you... Okay, you're saying, Mr. Meinert, it has to do with the aggregation problem regarding capital and whether natural growth rate is exogenous or endogenous to demand. Interesting. So it seems that you have a specific economic model in mind, which is a bit different than the models that I typically use. So I will try to answer that in a more satisfying way than I did now in that post, because I remember you posting that. Someone is saying you should collaborate with Unlearning Economics. I will do that. We have an inflation video planned, but it's my fault. The idea is that I will send him sort of the main stories of inflation, and that we're going to comment on it together, just like I did with Econoboy in my USA versus Netherlands video. But I'm way behind schedule, and I have a lot of work to do for the universities. as well, but it will come, and hopefully very soon. Ooh, Siegfried asks how to save the Turkish economy. Yeah, so Turkish economy is very interesting because they have sort of this crisis that's very similar to how many emerging market economies have a crisis where they just import a lot more than they export, and so the currency got under pressure. And then they have a leader in Mr. Erdogan, who is a very unorthodox economist and believes that high interest rates actually contribute to inflation. And so they often do the reverse of what you would typically do. But actually, I just saw this commentator saying that now the Turkish economy is adjusting somewhat because of how low the lira has been for some time. You know, traditional theory would say, but so then, okay, their exports become more competitive, and so that will help them sort of get out of this situation, which doesn't always work because it takes a very long time to build up an export industry. But I just saw this tweet from an economist that I do respect, where they said that might be happening. So it might save itself somewhat. But yeah, I'll have to do a full video on Turkey to give a more intelligent answer, I think. Matthias, also very interesting. What's your, in your opinion, the best pension system in the world? So it was really nice for the America versus Netherlands video to dive into pension systems a little bit. I do think it's important that a pension system works for everybody and not just for the most wealthy people in society. So there I would discredit the American system somewhat. So in that sense, the Dutch one is better. But there are also very different pension system designs. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that in the old days, you used to also have pension systems that don't depend on people saving now or like consuming less and putting that all in financial markets, which might inflate the values of these financial markets, but it just being a transfer from the younger generation to the older generation. And that is something I would really like to explore more. So my gut feeling would be a pension system that works like that might be super interesting from a macro perspective. Okay. Ooh, Pizza Police 1. Love your name. Wonder how that works. But economics around space, is it just open for private enterprise to take over? Yeah, is it? I mean, at the moment it is, but that's very interesting, huh? I mean, we might see again something similar to what we saw with European explorations, where a lot of private companies did the exploration, and they frankly did horrible things as well, which won't be possible in space, or at least not in the immediate future, I guess. And if you take out that element, then it might actually work. I mean, it might there might be some space for private enterprise in the beginning phase, but then probably not for too long. I don't think that would ever work, but that would be super interesting. Ooh, Joanne Preuter. Do you think the Rethinking Economics movement has changed the economics curriculum at universities? So I know what you're talking about. The economics, Rethinking Economics is a movement that started, I think, in the UK and US mainly. And it was all about students saying, you know what, all of these sort of neoclassical models where we have these optimizing agents and the economy is always in equilibrium, it's always going to a stable path. That's just not what we see in real life, and we should change the curriculum. I fully supported that movement. I was part of it as a student, or at least sympathetic to it. Has it changed the curriculum? Yes, I think so, actually, because so for example, I made this video right at the start of the channel about how banks actually create money. And there I said the money multiplier is a myth, doesn't work. And now actually my father is an economics high school teacher, or used to be. And I went to a conference with him, and actually they told me, we actually changed this last year, so that is working. And also more and more I get comments from people under that video saying, well, I didn't have the money multiplier, or what you said in that video is exactly what my economics professor is saying. So I think that is working to a certain extent, but not by enough, in my opinion. Okay, let me have a look at some more question. Nicholas with some information on the French pension system. Interesting. Yeah, so he's saying that with the age pyramid reversing, the system gets underfunded in a system like the one I described. Which is obviously true. But that also happens in a system where people save, but perhaps later. Is that correct? I mean, I do know that in the Netherlands at the moment we also have that problem. Okay, very nice donation and question by Samuel. What do you consider to be the last big breakthrough to the field of economics? That's a very interesting question, because that's because the thing is, like with physics or chemistry or something, breakthroughs are far more obvious. Like someone invents something and it works all the time. Whereas with economics, we influence the system that we study, and so sometimes, like for example, when there was Nobel Prize winners Black and Scholes, and in finance, and they invented, or they formalized this way of pricing derivatives or options, and so that was hugely successful in the sense that, like, you really saw that a lot of traders were sort of taking that and putting it into practice. So it worked, but then their own hedge fund, using that, went bust in a spectacular way in '97. Don't quote me on that, but and so what had happened is that they had not taken into account that the market changed, using that instrument. So that seemed like a big breakthrough, and it was obviously very influential. But so, do you catch my drift? Like, that's partially what makes economics less prone to having breakthroughs. And a second thing is that, especially in macroeconomics, the data is just so horribly bad that it's also very difficult to verify certain theories. And also the system, because it's complex, might actually change. So this is something that I ran into when making these macroeconomic agent-based models, is that in those economies, so this was a pretty big computer program with 10,000 agents, and there were households, firms, banks, central bank, and they were all interacting. And I had programmed them, myself. So I knew what everybody was doing. And still, it was sometimes really difficult for me, the God who created that little universe, to understand what was going on with it because of complexity, meaning that the system is so complex that one thing reacts to another, and even though I knew how they individually reacted, I didn't know how they would interact after a while. Does that make sense? So that's another thing, I think, why, especially in macroeconomics, it's very difficult to get breakthroughs, because it's just very difficult to check if a theory actually works. Okay. This is also an interesting question from Darius König, I think, German probably. Hi, Yuri, can the very high target 2 balance of, for example, Germany, in your opinion, hurt the country or its inhabitants? Could you maybe plan a video on this in the future if it's too complex now? So target 2 is something, and just probably have to explain to people who aren't in Europe, and even if you are, is a balancing system that the European Central Bank uses to balance between country central banks. So, because you have these big trade differences between, for example, Greece and Germany, you also have money flowing the other way. But in how that the ECB sort of handles that is by saying, well, let's delay the money flow, and then you have this target 2 balance, which is positive for Germany and negative for Greece. So that's how they handle that. So it's and because the imbalances in the Eurozone are pretty big and very consistent, meaning that they remain very big, like Germany and Netherlands are massive exporters, and they have remained like that for a long time, whereas like theory would predict that shouldn't be allowed to happen because, then they get more expensive, less competitive, and so then at some point, the reverse happens. Although we have, of course, a fixed exchange rate in Europe, so that might play a part in that. But I don't think I know the target 2 balances themselves are a big issue in Germany politically. So they say, well, we're sneakily lending out money to the Greek people again, right? But I don't think that's an issue because we have a shared monetary system. This probably also happens in the USA, where some states' central banks are in deficit, while some other state, like New York or something, central banks have a surplus, and that's totally fine. But so that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But these consistent imbalances in the Eurozone, I think, are definitely a problem. The same way as it would always be. If you always export more than you import, at some point, your customers are gonna run out of money to pay you. So that's a problem, but I don't think the target 2 balances are in themselves a problem. They're more a reflection of that problem. Will I plan a video on it? Yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I should put it in the Eurozone video. It seems to be a big part of that. Okay, I'm just scrolling down. Ooh, this is a nice question from Dimitri. Any economics video games you would suggest? Yes. Economics? No. Well, video game about economics? I don't. So I personally really like to play City Skylines. I think that's a really fun game partially for the economic aspect of it. But having made these simulation models, I know that a lot of these economies cheat in the sense that they have sort of a black hole or something, or where the money supply always increases, or they maybe don't even have money at all, and so some agents just can run infinitely negative balances. That's how that works, and that's very frustrating for me as an economist, because I know they're sort of cheating, and so their economies are super unrealistic, and that's why I don't like. That just irks me a little bit, and so I stick to playing shooters and RPGs more. But City Skylines is a very interesting game nonetheless, I think, from an economics perspective. And at some point, I would actually like to try if I can get some agent-based modelers to turn some of their simulations into a game. I think that would be really fun, because there just aren't that many real economics simulation games, right? Okay. Ooh, Kwak Win Chan, hopefully I pronounced it correctly, asks, could you comment on how window guidance was carried out in China and affected its economy, as you mentioned in the Japan video I did? So window guidance, for people who haven't seen the Japan video, is a policy that's just not very often discussed in the West, which is about the central bank saying to banks, look, you have to increase your credit supply by this amount, and sometimes even like to this industry, to that industry, and to that. So it's economic planning, actually. And the Japanese did it, and the Chinese did it as well. I read a paper about this. And I suspect that it has had a big impact. I think it's easier to do if you're a developing economy, because then it's more difficult for people to get around that. You saying, oh, you should put it there, but then sneakily that sector using it for something else. Or you could maybe see it as, using a shotgun to shoot at a problem or something, where you just have this very wide spread. So it's a very inaccurate tool, which could be great for an economy that's just getting started. but I know that's not an answer to your question. Has it had an impact on China? I think so. And so the idea that I have for the China video at the moment is, unlike like the Japan video was subdivided into decade. But for the China one, I would like to focus on some of the stories that economists typically, especially Western economists, typically don't discuss. So, I mean, they would always say, oh, well, it was just, communism and then a market economy, and so they now very rich. That's it. But there are a lot of communist countries which also became capitalist, and they didn't become super rich. So I think there's more to the story. And I think one chapter of that story will be window guidance. For example, another chapter would be what they have, like the state-led capitalism is what the Chinese themselves call it. And I think that is also very interesting, right? Like one thing I try to do when doing research is look at credible sources, but also look at sort of standard sources, but also look at what people themselves are saying about this. So that's another chapter. Okay, let me just look at another big one. Is it possible to think of an economic theory without the rational agent assumption? Yes, that's very much possible. I made one such model at some point where traders in the financial markets, like half of them would be mean reversion trader and half would be speculative. So thinking, if the price goes up, it will continue to do so. And that did work. But it is very hard to actually make that work. And also, I really criticize the rational agent for how excessive it's implemented. But to be honest, I think if you look at a lot of markets, many people do act rationally individually in the sense that they try to think critically about how to succeed in this market, but they just can't. They're not insanely rational, right? Like they're not super irrational most of the time. Like people in markets are not typically go to an auction of, I don't know, fish or something. Like the people are not in a very emotional state all the time. They are rational often. It's just that they're not hyper rational and they can't look into the future. And if you're being rational at the individual level, doesn't mean that that as a collective people are rational. Like for example, in a housing market or something, it's perfectly rational to think that the price will go up tomorrow, but it's not rational that everybody thinks that the price will always go up. Okay. So it is possible to have an economic theory without rational agent assumption, but I think it's very difficult because people are, in many cases, are fairly rational, I would say. Let me just read. I'm curious of the flow of wealth and how unaccounted for assets contribute to valuations in markets, for example, the Pandora Papers. Yeah, that is like by blank. Thank you for that question. That's actually a very interesting question in the sense that I've been thinking a little bit about how particularly London and or the UK and the US, I guess Europe as well. I think like if you take London, New York, and their role of their financial system is massive, and so a lot of wealth is flowing from emerging market economies through some corrupt elites to those places. But it's very interesting, like how does that affect, for example, property prices in London? I think, if you go into the Pandora Papers, you'll find a lot of people from, leaders from foreign countries or having property in London. Well, has that affected property price in London, thereby making it difficult for teachers and let's say firemen and police women to live in London? Yeah, probably, right? But we're not talking about that too much. So this is also something I would be interested in. Frank, are we still taking questions? Yes, we are. Although I had the idea of doing a 1-hour stream. We're already at 1:15, and I have no idea how many people are still in the stream. I still see a lot of people in the chat though, so nice. there are. Let's just continue, because the idea of this Q&A is also to thank you all for supporting this channel and subscribing to the channel, and so you deserve also to ask me some questions, I think. Okay, Neocesir says bounded rationality and informational frictions, etc., can be an alternative to perfect rationality. And yes, I totally agree with that. So in all of my models, I always use a bounded rationality framework, which is basically a fancy way of saying what I said. Like, people are not super irrational typically, but they can't see into the future. So they're boundedly rational. Actually, if you make an agent-based model, you can't make a perfectly rational model. It's just an agent that looks into the future, because then you would have to program a computer agent that knows what the simulation is going to do, even though I, as a modeler, don't even know what the simulation is going to do. So I found that to be impossible, which I thought was interesting. But these other types of modelers, they make different types of models, and that's why that works really well, actually, like a fully rational agent. Okay. Thijs Dekkers. Is the recent increase in real estate stock prices related to central bank money printing? No. Well, I don't think it's related to central bank money printing in the traditional sense, but quantitative easing likely had a big impact on asset price increases, I think. But it's not everything. Like, for example, and I'll just take the example I mentioned at the start of the stream, I'm moving from Netherlands to Belgium. Property prices in Belgium are far less crazy than in the Netherlands, but we have the same quantitative easing program, right? So I don't think it's everything. It can't explain everything, I think, but it probably has been a factor. And I think this is something where central bankers should really look at their policy and say to themselves, okay, we did this to create inflation, and it's not really creating too much, or it didn't used to create too much inflation, at least. Now we do have inflation, perhaps, and we know that it's likely driving up asset prices, making not only increasing inequality, but also increasing inequality in a way that is not fair, right? Like, people just lucky, had assets, QE increases prices of these assets, that's not fair, right? Like, they did nothing to get that money. So I think QE does have an impact, and I think central bankers should really be critical about if this is what they want. Damn, I guess we'll never know if he's the villain from Quantum of Solace. I must have missed who you were talking about there, Ryan. But I'm also excited to see the new James Bond movie. What future, by Amar L, what future heterodox economic theories are you interested in, such as behavioral economics? This is, so heterodox economics, for people who aren't, part of this world. So you have orthodox economics, which is mainstream economics, and then there are a lot of people from different schools of thought who call themselves heterodox economists. But then, if you go into that world, there are a lot of schools of economic thought. One of that is behavioral economics. I have featured that on the channel, basically meaning like, people, especially in financial markets, aren't always rational, but also there are certain specific biases, which is interesting, I think. But the biases, I just read a blog, I think, or maybe even an article, I don't know, recently, that a lot of the studies by famous behavioral economists about these specific biases, like loss aversion and other biases, didn't hold up that well. They weren't easy to replicate, which I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure if that's true, but I do like behavioral finance a lot. The biases thing, I thought was super interesting when I read about it at first, but I'm not sure if that's a major part of the macroeconomy that I'm interested in. But I am actually more, influenced by a school of thought which is called complexity economics. I wrote a blog about it on Exploring Economics website. If you Google Exploring Economics, Complexity Economics, you'll find that. And that is much more about seeing the economy as a complex system, which is not necessarily always in an equilibrium. So it could be in a stable state, but it's sort of always moving and it's always doing interesting things, whereas sort of the standard economic models are more about this stable equilibrium. And I think there's still a future in that school, which I think is very interesting. I also used to talk to a lot of people from post-Keynesian economics, but I don't know too much about what is post-Keynesian and what is not. But I think complexity economics definitely still has a future. Elliot, I am an economics major at UCT and I love your work. Love from South Africa. Thank you so much. That is something that I really miss. I really miss Cape Town. That's such a beautiful city, and I'm sad that we couldn't meet at UCT. Then I'm very happy to receive a donation by the Old Decades playlist. And now I'm very interested in that playlist, but thank you so much. That really helps out. Okay, let me see. More questions. Blank. Thanks for doing what you do. Your channel stands out in a sea of trading grifters and hyper-politicized commentators. Oof, yeah. Not saying politics, economics isn't intertwined. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I do voice my, saying I don't think central bankers should continue QE at the moment because of rising inequality, which is inherently a political statement, right? But what I try to keep in mind when doing that is that I think that the economy should work for people who work for the economy in a sense that, like, if people produce goods and services and teach and I don't know, they should be rewarded for that, and they can also, get rich from that. But people shouldn't be rewarded for not contributing to society wherever possible. And I think that's not I don't think that's a very controversial ideology, but I do think it's important for you all to know that this is something, that's how I think about things. So, like, if people comment sometimes, oh, you're biased, that's obviously true, right? Like, I have my biases as well, but this is what they are. So that maybe helps when trying to judge my videos. Dimitri asks if I have thoughts on Saudi Arabia attempting to diversify its economy. Yes, my thought about that is, haven't they been trying to attempt to diversify their economy for like 20, 25 years now? I'm not sure how well that is going. The last time I checked, they had all of these new city sort of plans, new city in the desert and city of the future, which I'm conflicted about because I love those in the sense that I just love the ambition of it. And as an economist, I hope it works, but they typically don't work. And they're typically sort of the product of rulers that are very ambitious, but don't really make the effort of really, digging down to the individual level of how an economy works and putting in the hard work to make it work. Right, like, so I'm not super optimistic about how successful it is. Frank, thank you so much for your donation. I'm super happy with that. And Frank says, can you do a book list for people like us that want to learn more about economics? Whenever I try to find stuff, it's usually about free markets, blah blah blah. Yeah, yes, I do. I do have book lists now under some of my videos posted, but I have a couple of my books here. I showed one at the beginning of the stream, but I know that there's already one more than 1 hour ago. This is an amazing book. It's really about history, which I love. I don't know if you can read this. This is like in a mirror image for you, or can you just read this? How Money Changes Everything. By William Goochman. I really love that one. Let me check. Oh, yes. This one I love. By Danny Roderick, very famous development economist. Economics Rules. And this one is, like Danny Roderick is fairly mainstream, but he's critical about economic models in this book, and he sort of articulates like why he's critical about them, and it's very similar to I think what I've said. Like, okay, so like these models have their advantages because if you make an economic model, it's very clear what your assumptions are, but they're often rubbish assumptions, and the math sometimes makes it very difficult for people to check those assumptions. But this is a book that is also well written and really fun. That I love. Let me check. Oh yeah. This is a big inspiration for the channel. Book The Narrow Corridor by Darren Acemoglu, also one of the most famous economists at the moment, and James Robinson. And this is about, like, the narrow corridor is about how there is this narrow corridor between how powerful a state gets and how powerful society gets to keep that state back. And I thought that was, and sort of their main point is like having a more powerful state can be really good for an economy, in the sense that, for example, the Dutch state is very powerful in a way because it can organize these massive events fairly well, and it can organize, you know, a military, and it can make super good roads. So it has a lot of power. But the Dutch society and many North Europeans, or like European societies, but they also, like, the societies also have a lot of power. So they sort of constrain that government. Like if you have a corruption scandal. So this was really eye-opening for me living in South Africa for a bit, where there were a lot of corruption scandals, my point. Oh yeah. But the problem was that the politicians just got away with it, and here, like, a local politician sort of got. They often get into trouble for like these very minor but still wrong transgressions. Like, I don't know, like not like it's like 500 euros or something to a family man, like a contract to a family member for making a gym or something, which is great, and that shows that society sort of keeps the state in check, but it's still very powerful. Whereas, for example, the South African state, I really noticed that they seem very powerful in the sense that they are very bureaucratic and therefore they are very annoying to deal with. But like, if you look at the services that they actually provide, or the security that they can actually provide, which is a big deal in South Africa, is very low. And so this theory sort of, like the theory in this book, deals with that in a very, like, can explain that, which I think I had never read before. So those are 3 books. I also have, oh yeah, final one for now. This one I also really liked, Adaptive Markets, because it has much more of a focus on, like, markets as not being super efficient, but changing all the time and still being somewhat efficient and still having a lot of very smart people in them, by Andrew Lowe. Yeah, Pat the cat. I had to, like, he's sitting on the stand of the microphone right now, and I don't know if you can hear that, like the man. Oh, sorry. Now people want to see you. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Nicholas also says that Donut Economics is a good book. I haven't read that one yet, but I've heard great stories about it. And thank you, Salokin, for the donation. I'd add on Good Economics for Hard Times, Tyranny of the Experts, Democracy and Prosperity. Ooh, interesting. Oh, these are, okay. These are different books. I thought this was like a subtitle. So Good Economics for Hard Times, Tyranny of the Experts, Democracy and Prosperity. The third pillar I do have. I just read it. Thank you for mentioning it. That one is also excellent, really good. It's actually very similar to the Narrow Corridor one I mentioned, where they, in the third pillar, it's by an Indian economist, mentioning also sort of the role of the community or society, which is very often not thought about. It's very often like the state versus the market. And then the third pillar is about the third pillar, which is community, which is also important. I think it's also something you see in in your daily life often, like sports clubs or other events that are not for profit, but they actually play a massive role in the economy, which the economists just don't talk about that much. So it's very interesting. Okay. So Xela63, what do you think about games with a very real life like economy, like EVE Online, which offer all the data from where something comes from and so on? What do you think can be learned from them? Yeah, so that's very interesting, huh? I think there are some videos from YouTubers about these economies, right? Like I've never played EVE Online. It seems like an interesting economy, and I would directly also wonder, like, hey, are they cheating in a way, or perhaps it's not possible because you have all these actual players? So I need to find out more about them. But I do take your point in saying that we can likely learn a lot from these video game economies because all the data is collected, and that's very different from our current economy, right? And I know I mentioned that even in my computer model, I couldn't fully understand what was going on because of complexity. But having all the data means that you can learn a lot more than not having the data, which is often the case in the macroeconomy. And for Yelmi, I get some geld voor een biertje, meaning money to get myself a beer. And thanks for the insights. Thanks. I totally appreciate that. I will get an alcohol-free beer. I have one in the fridge right now waiting for me. But maybe I'll get a more fancy Belgian beer as well at some point after this stream. Okay. Chico Blanco Verano, do you worry about political economy overestimating its ability to discern the totality of the system and its content, i.e. the world we live in and its resources? Wow, that is a difficult sentence for me to totally understand. That's a difficult question. Political economy. Overestimating its own ability to discern the totality of the system and the context. For sure. Yeah. Many economists and politicians overestimate their own ability of understanding the system. Yeah, for sure. If that's what you mean. Hey, Roy, thank you so much for your donation and the nice game over emoticon, which totally reminds me of the video I did on the response for hyperinflation on EE, and I had just so much fun with quoting him on the game over stuff. I don't know if that's what you meant, but and Owen, goed bezig. Thank you so much, and also for the donation, Owen. I know that you have been watching my videos way before I had 1,000 subscribers, and thank you so much for all the comments back then as well. Sensitive Zook, will you do more economics of different country videos and also more economy comparison videos? Yes, I will do more economy of different country videos. So the thing is, at the moment, my next one will be on central banking history in Europe. So Italy, Netherlands, Sweden, and England. That's like a little preview from my side. And then one will be on inflation, and so that's non-country economies, but that's partially because I was teaching a course at the University of Groningen, so I sort of made a video for that. But I do want to get back to these countries because they're super fun to make, and I learned so much about how different small structures can make a massive difference beyond sort of the standard theories. I try to apply standard theories as well, but I thought this was very fascinating about doing these country studies, so I will do a lot more of them. And the next one will be the economy of Afghanistan is one I'm working on right now with a student who's helping me out a little bit, thanks to some of the donations that you're making, like the one from Salokin. Thank you so much. And Afghanistan is really interesting because I looked at that economy, and they have this massive trade deficit that's absolutely insane. It's like 40% or something, top of head. absolutely insane. So immediately I was like, hey, that's Lebanon. That's going to be hyperinflation. But then I was listening to a podcast where they interviewed the former central bank governor, and he revealed that they have no money printer in Afghanistan, because what they did is they imported new notes of Afghani currency. And thanks to sanctions, the country that they imported it from is no longer allowed to export that to. So that's very interesting. So I immediately thought of a thumbnail with hyperinflation, and then like, ooh, maybe I should reconsider that position. Like, even though I don't think money printing is the source of most hyperinflation episodes, it often is a part of it, since a government has to, at some point, start printing more because it can't pay its bills. So let's see what will happen there. That will be the Taliban may be sort of forced libertarians in a way. So that will be very interesting. So that video, I hope I can have it done in a week or two or something. I hired an editor to help me out with that one, so I hope that will help. Okay, Silicon, I will answer your question as well. Democracy and prosperity is incredibly underrated. It pushes back on Piketty and Roderick. Okay, cool. And creates a model explaining of how democracy emerged and how capitalism and democracy are mutually dependent. Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, I will have a look at that one, because I do also have Piketty here. Can you see it in the background? Yeah, Capital. Yeah, I think so. But the Piketty book, oh my goodness! I remember when he was very popular. I was at a conference in Paris where he was supposed to speak, and I missed him because I ate some very bad food the night before. But he was so popular at the time, and it's great what he did for contributing to the debate on actually talking about inequality. But the book, I just can't get through it. It's not very well written in my opinion. Okay, Mr. Sepka joining late. Were there any questions about MMT yet? And I remember someone else asking me that a few minutes ago as well. Yes, there was already a question about it, and I talked about it extensively. But what I will do with this whole I'm getting tired. What I will do with this whole stream is I will edit it and we'll post the answer there. But MMT is definitely very interesting, and it is something that I should talk about more. Okay, Matthias, that's an interesting question. What are your biggest worries, economically speaking, in the world? So, one of my biggest worries is the debt buildup that we're seeing. So I'm not in the camp of sort of the Austrians on YouTube, or like the more populist YouTube economics channel, that I think it will sort of explode and this whole house of cards will come down. But I do recognize that it might, and also that, but I think it's more likely that there will be big stagnation at some point, because if you get a lot of debt buildup amongst households, and that is backed up by sort of rising asset prices, and then if these stop rising, you can get massive sort of stagnation, in the sense that is what powers people to go ahead. And maybe it's fine that an economy stagnates at some point, or sort of reaches its potential. But if that happens in an economy that was super reliant on asset price increases and that being used to pay off debts, that might be a problem. And also the inequality that comes from that. I really enjoyed reading the comments under the Dutch video about, inequality is not as bad in the Netherlands as this report made it out to be. But then a lot of people said, yeah, but inequality doesn't matter because as long as people are not dirt poor. And I get that argument. That's fair enough from the perspective. I might not fully agree with it, but it's fair enough. I think it has a point. But from a macroeconomic perspective, that's not true. We do care about inequality because people who are less rich typically spend more of their money, and an economy measures spending, right? So if people hoard wealth, it's all in in the hands of some people who don't spend too much of it, then you can definitely get stagnation, I think. So I'm very worried about this type of stagnation. And also I am very worried about climate change and the effects of that, living well under the sea level here, but also because I don't know too much about that. So this is something that I would like to know more about. I'm not an expert on climate change at all, so I don't know how worried we should actually be. Perhaps some of you will know, but that makes me more worried. Like if I don't know too much about something, then and a lot of people are saying it's a massive risk, then that does get me worried as well. Like also if you think about like some of the emerging market economies turning into deserts, for example, and what that will do with, displacing many people, that will be super chaotic, and that does worry me. Yeah. Chico Blanco, thanks for answering the questions. Love the channel. Thanks. And also for pushing back against the finance advice chats. There's a lot of financial advice YouTube, huh? That's true. And they dabble in economics. Some of them I think are pretty good though, but not all of them by far. And they just so easily go into economics, right? Like, that's very difficult for me. I think that's the problem if you go on to be an academic at some point. If you want to do a PhD, you just learn so much about how what you don't know is that you become more careful in making these big sweeping statements. Thanks for the cheers from Rio. And I think I will have to end the stream fairly soon because I'm getting tired and my cat wants a lot of attention. So let's end the stream in 5 minutes. Matthäus, is Greece still in a debtor's prison? And if yes, how could it get out? I don't know, to be honest. I think what happened to Greece is a real tragedy. But so you have this thing where if you completely break down an economy, it could be that at some point sort of the bottom point has been reached. But that bottom point is very likely to be much lower for Greece than what it would otherwise have been, because I know that a lot of Greek, like the smartest people from, or not all, but a lot of very smart Greek people have just moved to other parts of Europe. So I wonder if it could ever bounce back fully if we hadn't let it get out of hand like that. But is it still in a debtor's prison? I don't know. Maybe it's reached bottom, but I should do more research on Greece specifically to tell you. Okay, this is also an interesting question. Fiesel? I hope I pronounced it correctly. Any fintech on your radar and why? So yeah, I'm actually looking into stablecoin fintechs at the moment. So I have an interview scheduled with via live stream like this with a fintech called Reserve, who want to make crypto like a reserve currency for emerging market economies, like a stable coin, which I thought was very interesting. I'm skeptical, but it is on my radar. And another one was recommended to me by the top donor of this stream, Joshua, Liquidity, which is also a stable coin. So I'm very interested in stablecoins right now because it's just it's such a bold experiment. And I am skeptical, but other than that, fintechs, I really liked the challenger banks at some point, like Revolut, especially in the UK and Europe, and N26 and Monzo. Monzo is also one in the UK, I think, but they seem to have stagnated a little bit now. But those are the main ones at the moment. Matthias with a question on the South Africa massive infrastructure problems like water supply, power supply. How do I see South Africa in 20 years? Someone else also asked me how I see, thanks Martin, how I see South Africa in 20 years. So South Africa, I think, is really at a turning point in the sense that, I think they had this economy under President Jacob Zuma where corruption was just running rampant and the government was just really messing up. And you see that now with their main power supplier, which still has a lot of blackouts. And that's horrible for people who also want to make the economy grow. Like even myself, when I started the channel, I had some blackouts like every day. At least it was scheduled. But you can imagine that you can't do a live stream if you have blackouts, right? So it can really be horrible for your business. So it's very, very risky, I think, for South Africa as well. But they might turn the corner at some point, because I do think that the Ramaphosa government, while having many faults still, and still many of the same people who are there, at least tried. And so the same way as it took like a couple of years under Zuma, and then the problems started sort of showing up. I mean, of course there were always problems before, but like the main problems started showing up later. This is often the case, I think, with macroeconomics. That's why it's so difficult to judge a president or on the situation now, or because, like this takes a long time. So hopefully South Africa can turn the corner. It has all the ingredients, right? It has a beautiful country, also very productive, fertile lands, and very smart people, and a lot of knowledge still there, and an industrial base for African continent that is still very impressive, right? They have all the ingredients. They do also have a judicial system that stepped in right at the right time and is prosecuting corruption, even though it's not getting everything. So I do think they have. I haven't given up on them entirely, but they do need to turn a corner rather quickly, because people are leaving the country, and the government is still often screwing up, I think. Okay, Olaf asking for my take on the Austrian School of Economics. Austrian School of Economics, I don't. There are two parts of it. There's the monetary school, which is, for me, too often comes across, at least, I'm not an expert, but on Austrian economics, comes across as gold-only coin, fixed currency, expanding economy. I don't think that's a very smart idea. But they make really good points about banks creating money and pointing towards the danger of that. I think they go too far. They say, well, that's all bad. No, but it is a risk, and it does create bubbles. And that's what the Austrians often mention, and I totally agree with them on that one. And also, and this I think is less well known, the Austrian economists are very big on economic complexity. Like, for example, Hayek has also written extensively on economic complexity, and specifically that, and sort of this sometimes inspired their more right-wing stances, that you can't control everything as a government. And you might have noticed that I think that the government can do a lot of good, but I do take their point that in an economy there are lots of individual decision makers, and that central planning, for that reason, is like the system is just too complex for that. That's one of the key points of Austrian economics. It's less widely known, and I totally agree with that one. Hey Matthias, thank you so much for the donation, and I'm very happy that you enjoyed this Q&A. And with that one, I think I will now get that alcohol-free beer and give the cat some attention, because he actually really wants to play now. So thank you all so much for joining, and I will get back to my videos. It's been a bit busy on my side, but I'm in this for the long term, and I will just keep pumping them out. Specifically there will be more response videos, country videos, central banking, inflation videos, and hopefully also some more live streams, because I really enjoyed this, and I will try to interview some people, and I just want to have a way of making more content more quickly. So thanks so much, take care, and I hopefully will see you in the future.